Good evening, everyone. So tonight we're going to go through, and the lesson is lesson number 6, and it's Esau and Jacob. Hopefully no yawning. I just ate dinner, so hopefully no burping either. We're going to go through the 27th, 28th, and 29th chapter of Genesis, which is a lot. But anyways, the key verse is Genesis, the 27th chapter, verse 41. It says, "And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, and then will I slay my brother Jacob." This lesson goes through and shows the blessing that God was going to give Jacob and his descendants. And you need to follow along with that because this is where we get the 12 tribes of Israel. This is also just pure, if you would, just pure hatred. And if you get something, one of the great things that you should get out of this lesson is that you're going to take and reap what it is you sow. God's promises are always going to come true. And so when you look at this lesson, just follow along with that train of thought that, God is faithful and that he is going to provide what it is that he said he's going to provide, and that also you're going to take and reap what it is you sow. So with that, let's jump in. This lesson starts off first look, and it says, Isaac and Rebekah began their life together in a faithful obedience to God and to Abraham. However, as time went by, they turned to scheming as the way to get what they wanted. And the result was that their family fell to pieces. A good beginning does not guarantee a happy ending. I want to take you at this point and just say to you, sometimes we get caught up in thinking that somehow we can take and think that we would come up with a better way to do something other than the way that God has planned things. And that can't be further from the truth. Whatever it is that God has set in place for you and I, whether it's the plan for you and I in our life, or whether it's the case in this situation, the blessing that he had for Isaac and Rebekah, God set this in place so that you would see that his plan is the plan that's going to take and come through with the promise. And no matter how much scheming or how much dishonesty, things that you do to try and circumvent that plan, God's plan is always going to come true. Isaac ignored God's specific instruction recorded in Genesis, the 19th chapter, verses 19 through 23, before his sons were born. God told Isaac and Rebekah that the blessing was to go to the younger son. What's wrong with that? Well, in the practices of that day, and it's still the practices today, the blessings or the way that things get inherited, they come through the oldest son, the son who has lived the longest, through his line. And God wasn't doing that in this case. He was doing it through the younger son, which, just so you know, that upset Esau a lot because he was the older son. So Esau had a great hatred towards his younger brother, and as a result, it showed the strife that was in the family. Jacob is the one who carried the promise from God. In later years, Isaac sought to give the blessing to Esau. Rebekah resorted to eavesdropping and deception in order to get Isaac to bless Jacob, and Jacob went along with this deception and actually tricked his father into blessing him. Taking advantage of the weakness of an elderly man is shameful, and we need to understand that at first Esau despised his birthright and sold it for a mess of pottage. If you would, it'd be like taking and having oatmeal, with a little bit of animal fat, and it was something that he was a hunter, so he came in and he was starving, and he wanted this, and so he sold his birthright to Jacob. And so when you look at this, understand, at first Esau despised his birthright and sold it for a mess of pottage. Later he wept when he actually lost it. Each member of this family was willing to disregard God's will and his direct teaching in order to get what they wanted. However, God is sovereign, and he can use sinful behavior to accomplish his purposes. Many people today still live just as the family did, and the result will be the same. These verses teach us how God deals with our infirmities and can use our failures to accomplish his will and advance his kingdom. A lot of times people look as if the sin is something that God planned, and he did not plan the sin, but he also has the foreknowledge to know what it is that he's working with. God knows all things. Let's turn over to Genesis, the 27th chapter. Genesis, the 27th chapter, verses 28 through 30, verse 41, and then also the 28th chapter, verses 1 through 4. This is where God talks about a plentiful blessing. So starting off 28th verse of the 27th chapter, it says, "Therefore God give thee of the dew of heaven and the fatness of earth and plenty of corn and wine." This was from God. "Let people serve thee and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee." And it came to pass, as soon as Isaac had made an end of blessing Jacob, and Jacob was yet scarce gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. And Esau hated Jacob. This is true hatred, by the way. I mean, this is, he wanted to kill him type hatred. It says, "And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessings wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, The days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob." Verses 1 through 4 of the 28th chapter. It says, "And Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said unto him, Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Arise and go to Pandan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, thy mother's father, and take thee a wife from thence of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. And God Almighty bless thee, and make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, that thou mayest be a multitude of people. And gave thee the blessings of Abraham to thee and to thy seed with thee, that thou mayest inherit the land wherein thou art a stranger, which God gave unto Abraham." Next thing that we're going to look at is the promise, and if you would, this is more or less like a will, if you would. It says in this ancient culture, the patriarchal blessing meant far more than a few kind words spoken at the end of life. This was equivalent to a last will and testament. In giving this blessing, Isaac was passing along a kind of title deed to the wealth of his family. This blessing included the right to perpetuate the name of the family and also to control the family fortune. Rebekah and Jacob conspired to deceive Isaac into giving the blessing to Jacob instead of to Esau. Normally, the blessing went to the eldest son. In this case, God had specifically instructed that the blessing should go to the younger. If each of these people had simply obeyed God, all this intrigue would have been unnecessary. As it happened, this incident divided the family permanently. Things were never the same after Jacob stole this blessing. We can only wonder what Rebekah and Jacob thought would happen after the blessing was given to Jacob. Did they expect Isaac to enjoy being deceived? Did they expect Esau to agree with them? Esau had previously sold his birthright, so he was not an innocent victim. When we practice deception instead of faith in God, we weave a horrible web of hatred and broken hearts. This is not a description of a happy home. And I hope that we get this, because so often we can get caught up when trying to do things that are dishonest or do things that are not what it is that would be pleasing to God. And I want us to understand that when we take and try and do things deceptively, God's not part of it. God cannot be part of darkness. And so when we go down that road of trying to deceive people or try to, hold on to things that are, hurting us, as far as like we're holding on to grudges or we're holding on to things that are hurting us, and we just hold on to those things until sometime in the distant, that comes up again, and boom, here it comes. You're reeling it back in what it is that you thought you were putting underneath, and you reel that back in and you use it again for some wicked reason. Once they were said, this teaches us about the power of our words. We are not required to utter either blessing or curse, but once we do, we can never recall our words. Words are powerful, and the things we say have consequences. We should take care when we speak, especially when we're talking to our kids. I know sometimes I talk to our girls, and I need to be careful with how I speak to them, because they don't look to me as you're having a conversation, adult to an adult. They look at you that they're the kid and you're the adult. And they so often are looking for, to be edified, to be lifted up, to be given words of encouragement. And I really need to watch myself with that, because sometimes I just banter with them to where we're joking around, and I take it as a joke, but they don't take it as a joke. Esau sought another blessing from Isaac, and when he found that this could not be done, he allowed his hatred to grow to such an intensity that he vowed to kill his own brother. He decided to wait until Isaac died and then openly kill Jacob. Perhaps he thought this was a way to get the blessing for himself. Isaac realized the danger of the situation, and he sent Jacob away to the house of Bethuel, the childhood home of Rebekah. This was many miles away, and once Jacob was there, he would be safe from the revenge of Esau. In other words, he was showing protection for his son. He was also providing for, if you would, the way for this blessing from God to take place. Just as Abraham had wisely sought a bride for Isaac, Isaac also sought a bride for Jacob, not from Canaan, but from his own people. God's promises to Jacob, second part, Genesis the 28th chapter, verses 13 through 15, and then verses 19 through 22. It says, "And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God, Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land wherein thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee, thy seed, shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into the land. For I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken of thee." Did you catch all that? Because verse 15, I don't know if you caught all that, but in verse 15 it says, I am with thee, will keep thee. That's a promise. And then I will not leave thee I have done that which I have spoken of thee. In other words, he's promised something, and he's giving that promise to his son. And he called the name of that place Bethel. But the name of that city was called Luz at the first. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, I will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace. Then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give thee 10th unto thee, 10%. It was a vow that he was making. And so, you see this and understand that, this was a 3-day journey for him to take and go to an area that he had not been, and for him to find his bride. Jacob journeyed toward Haran and stopped first at Bethel, and about 3 days' journey from his home. That night he had a dream. When he saw an angel traveling back and forth from the earth to heaven, he realized that he was under the divine protection of God. Have you ever been there where you know for sure that it is by God's protection that you are doing what it is that you're doing? That literally the wolves are, they're at the door and they're wanting to come in, and it's only the hand of God that's protecting you. God's protection for you and I, you cannot take and look at his protection, his hedge of protection, his hand of protection around you. You cannot look at that and scoff at that. I think there's a lot of church members that really just do not understand the blessing of having God's hedge of protection around them. And you need to understand that, because I'm telling you right now, without that hedge of protection, without God's hand protecting you day in, day out, Satan is there as a ravening wolf wanting to rip you and tear you apart. So, consider that. Consider that and understand that it's important for you and I to see what it is that God has in store for you and I. God cares for his people. For his actions, instead, God reaffirmed to Jacob covenant, and he made Jacob's grandfather Abraham. God cared for Abraham and for Isaac, and now God promised to care for Jacob as well. God promised to make Jacob great, and his descendants would be numberless. He first promised to watch over and protect him whatever he went, and to bring Jacob back into his land once again. Facing uncertain future, his first appearance here, it was significant. Here Jacob learned the truth of Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, verse 10, that God had a plan for his life, accepting the truth in his life and changing if we believe that God has a plan for us. God has a plan for every single one of his people. If you are saved, he has a plan for you. And that plan is for you to take and join a scriptural New Testament church. And his plan will be revealed to you of what it is that God wants you to do in his church, in and through his church. And that's a significant thing, because God is not going to give you a plan that's void of his way. In other words, he's not going to give you a plan that goes around or circumvents the way that he has laid it out for you to follow him. And that way is in and through his church. Then shall the Lord be my God. In the 28th chapter of Genesis, the 21st verse is filled with meaning. Usually the term Lord refers to the coming of God, the Messiah. Jacob was looking forward to Jesus in the statement. Then Jacob promised something. He promised 10%, that he would give back to God from what God gave him. At this time, Jacob did not have much, but he realized that God would increase his wealth, and he promised to return a portion of that increase back to God. In all matters, our giving is an expression of our love. How much we are willing to give is directly related to how much we love. In Matthew, the 6th chapter, verse 21. So understand that, your reasonable service is 10%. You giving is above that 10%. And so when you look at the relationship that Jacob was setting up, he was setting up a relationship of understanding, I understand, Lord, that you're blessing me with this, but for you and I to take this example and follow through with this and go, okay, I understand what it is that God's promising me here, but think about what it is that is God's. All of what he gives you is his. So us recognizing and tithing to our church and giving that 10%, that is something that you are acknowledging who God is. You're acknowledging this is where he has me in this church, and that you're acknowledging that you're giving that 10%. That's your reasonable service. Reasonable. I say that because just think if you were, you're employed or you're working for someone and you think about the time and the person goes, oh, well, let me just give you reasonable. Okay. Let me give you a C effort. Let me give you mediocre, if you would. I don't think anybody wants that, especially as an employee. You don't want that from your employee. You want better than reasonable. I challenge you to always try and give as much as you can. I remember when I was working for the fire department, started, and it was actually a challenge from one of our adult teachers, but he made the challenge that, hey, when you get a raise, give God a raise, give him back more. And what I started realizing was, okay, here's 10%, and you got that raise, and all of a sudden you're giving 11% to God, then you're giving 12% to God, then you're giving 13%, and pretty soon you're up to 20%, and you're going, man, I just keep on getting blessed with God taking in and looking after me more and more, and he's taking care of my family more and more. And you realize it's only by the grace of God that you have any of those things that you consider a blessing in your life. Genesis, the 29th chapter, verses 25 through 30, a deceiver is deceived. And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah, and he said to Laban, what is this thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me or tricked me? And Laban said, it must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. In other words, in their country, it's not a good deal to be able to give away the younger daughter when the older daughter is still available. So he gave her the older daughter, and he did it through trickery. Verse 27, and by the way, this was a 7-year commitment that Jacob had made to him. And the 7-year commitment was working for him for 7 years to be able to receive Rebekah. Verse 27 says, fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. So he ended up serving 14 years total. 7 years was what he agreed to for Rebekah. The dad gave him, in this situation, he gave him Leah, and Leah took and was the older daughter, which isn't what Jacob wanted. He wanted Rachel. So he worked another additional 7 years. Verse 28, it says, and Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel, his daughter, to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel, his daughter, Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her maid. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. And I say this because this is an example of reaping what it is you sow. Jacob journeyed on the home of Laban, his uncle, and fell in love with Laban's daughter, Rachel. He made an agreement with his uncle to work 7 years in order to marry Rachel. And after the wedding night, he discovered that he had been tricked and that he had married Leah, the older sister of Rachel. The trickster had been tricked. And if you would, the trickster received what it is that he had sown years before. The man who deceived his father had been deceived. Laban's explanation must have been a painful reminder of his own deception of Isaac. The older sister had been substituted for the younger. just as younger son had taken the blessing that would normally go to the older brother. Jacob still wanted to marry Rachel, so he ignored the pattern taught by his grandfather and his father. A week later, and he married Rachel and had to work another 7 years for her. From the beginning, God had established a pattern for our home that was one man in monogamous relationship with the one woman for life. People have often ignored this pattern, but they do so to their own hurt. It is interesting to note that it was Leah who first bore Jacob children. Her firstborn son, was Reuben, and she went on to become the mother of 4 other sons. Rachel was childless for a time, and would eventually bear 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Interesting, it would be Leah, the first wife of Jacob, who would be the mother of Levi and Judah. And you understand the significance that's there if you look at the tribe of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob would also father 2 children by Bilhah, the handmaid of Rachel, and 2 children by Zilpah, the handmaid of Leah. So going through this, you hopefully see, the deception that takes place. You see the ignoring God's will, and more than interesting to me is that God's plan, no matter what man throws at it, God's plan is going to take and work out, and it's going to take and come to fruition. Isn't that a blessing? It is to me, that when you look at what God promises and what God takes and shares with man as far as, this is my will, this is what it is I want to have happen, man needs to understand God's going to get his way no matter what. And so to me, this lesson teaches us for you and I to come in a place where we take and get on the side of God when it comes to doing his will. Believe me, because if you're in that position where you take and say, well, you know what, I want to do my own thing, but I also want to try and, you can't ride a fence with God. It doesn't happen. So you either do what it is that is pleasing to God, you do what it is that is that specific way that is God's, or you don't. And either way, God can still use you. The question is whether or not you're going to be on the receiving end of a blessing, or if you're going to be on the receiving end of going against God. And I don't know about you, but when you have a promise that's been given to you, it's been given to your grandfather, it was given to your father, and now it's being given to you, for you to share that blessing, because it is a blessing. It is a blessing to take and have God's hand of protection around you. Think about that this week as you're, thinking about what it is that God has blessed you. And I know we've had some very tragic things that took place this week, things that, hopefully they're learning experiences for people. But there are things where you need to understand that God's hand of protection was still around someone. And for you and I to think about that. Things that are happening in our church that Satan wants to tear our church apart. He wants to tear, fellowship and unity apart, and God doesn't. And so be on the receiving end of what it is that God has for blessings for his church and also for you and I. Don't be on the end where you're the one causing that division and that separation. God is merciful and gracious. But understand, when you come to hurt something that's precious to him, you're on the receiving end of going against God, and that is just not a place to be. So I hope you guys have a great week. I hope you take and study out this lesson and you find the blessings that are in there. Brother Phil will be given next week's lesson, and continue to pray for Brother Phil and just drop him a line, a text or something, telling him that you're praying for him. Continue to pray for Julian and the accident that he was in. I praise God for his hand of protection around him. So God bless you guys, and I love you. And man, I can't even begin to tell you how much I'm wishing and hoping for a day where we're sitting in a classroom and being able to take and converse and fellowship with one another. Love you guys.